Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of The Boardroom, where we are speaking to some of Malta's best business minds, and we are asking for their opinions as we navigate the next few weeks and possibly even months of economic uncertainty. Now, The Boardroom is streamed live, and that means that you can add your comments and your questions below. And if we manage, we will pass them on to our interviewees as part of the session. Of course, if you're not watching us live, then you can watch this back streamed on who'swho.mt, which is Malta's leading business portal. Now, today, our focus is going to be the economy at large, and we're asking the question, who will beat COVID? Will it be Keynes or will it be Darwin? A bit of insight there for our viewers. Of course, Darwin takes the approach that it will be the survival of the most adaptable, whereas Keynes is all about short-term props. Okay, so wishing the problem away in the short term. And to answer that very important question today, we are joined by Gordon Cordina, who is a leading economist in Malta, active in both the national and international consultancy assignments, and a very good contributor to the media. And we're also joined by JP Fabri, who's an economist and partner at Seed, and he's amassed both local and international advisory experience. And he's also a visiting lecturer at the University of Malta. Gordon and JP, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us on The Boardroom. And before we get started in earnest, where are you joining us from today? JP, where are you in lockdown?
At home, working remotely from home.
Wonderful. And Gordon?
Equally at home in Zabuj, Gozo, where life is perhaps not as hard as in other places. But it is more or less a reasonable place where to lock down, have time to think, and perhaps be more productive than one would otherwise be.
Fantastic. Great to hear. And JP, I'm going to come straight to you to start off our conversation. And COVID could be considered a black swan event. Could you tell us perhaps what that means and maybe give us a comparison to past black swan events?
Sure. So even here currently, there's a lot of debate whether to classify it as a black swan, grey rhino, white swan. But I think the essence of a black swan is usually categorized on three. I mean, if the event is an outlier, right? If the impact was extreme, and then once it happened, could it have been predictable? Apart from this whole debate, I would subscribe that it is a black swan for the simple reason that a lot of people out there, especially business owners, were really not expecting this. So maybe in the beginning of January, there were some reports coming out that this is a pandemic, it's going to grow exponentially. But in essence, business leaders did not expect the impact to be so big at the very, very beginning. So I would say that apart from the academic debate, this has been a very extreme, impactful event, which has practically caused the global economy to pause.
Thank you, JP. And in fact, Gordon, coming over to you, we did expect 2020 to be slower, perhaps, than previous years. Was this your prediction for 2020 before we got to the pandemic? And in line with that, how off track are we going to be from the projections that were made?
Yes, we have to distinguish essentially from a slowdown, which is a normal cyclical reaction to the growth which our economy has been experiencing over the past 3 to 5 years, to the abrupt halt in activity which is being experienced globally, and not least, of course, in Malta, which is more of a game changer to the normal growth path of an economy rather than part of the usual predictable cyclical fluctuations which we had been expecting also on the back of advice from International Monetary Fund, from the European Commission, to happen in 2020 and 2021. Possibly the more relevant questions at this stage to address are which sectors, how resilient, and which measures to be undertaken in order to ensure a quick recovery in a new world in which we'll have to be operating.
Thank you, Gordon. And JP, I'll put that to you as well. How off track do you think we're going to be?
I think that it's a complete game changer. So as Gordon rightly said, we need to distinguish between a cyclical slowdown. I mean, we're growing at very fast rates, possibly reaching an economic plateau in the sense that we were reaching our full potential. This is a complete halt. You know, I mean, we never imagined to see planes all parked in an airport, for example, or airports completely shut down. So this has stalled global supply chains. I mean, it's a complete never experienced, at least in our lifetime. So
absolutely. And what do you think that, you know, if we have to look to the future, obviously with these new projections in place, when do you think business is going to look like it did before, JP? Is it going to be a year, 2 years, more than that? Can we never imagine the way business was again?
The thing is that there are so many assumptions that are still very fluid. So is there going to be a second wave, which is going to be even harder than the first? Are we going to have a vaccine in place which will allow the global movement of people to resume? What are consumers' perceptions? Are they going to go out once restrictions are lifted? Is the aid to companies going to reach them in the right time that they will actually survive or not? So I think it also depends on the sectors that we're looking at, and what's going to happen. The recovery very much depends or is a function of the interconnectedness of the global economy, because one country's policy is going to affect another country's recovery. So I think it's going to take quite some time, or at varying degrees, even countries. So depending on the economic structure of that country. So it's I would say it's hard to tell at this point in time.
Of course. And Gordon, can you make any predictions on that one?
I've stopped making predictions a while ago, Joe, to tell you the truth, except perhaps to say that it will be hot in July and cold in January, but there again, not necessarily so. I think that we have to focus on the mantra of living and working sustainably within the COVID event. It is no longer a question now of expecting at some future precise date for this problem to be completely disappearing, even though there might be a vaccine which would be available possibly in different parts of the world at different time frames going into the future. There's no guarantee that there won't be a recurrence of a similar event, which would require more or less a similar reaction globally to that which we are living through today. So I believe very much into a question of adapting right away, starting as from yesterday, ideally, to move our business setups, our organizations in a manner that they are productive, sustainable, feasible over a long term within this new operating reality, which is in itself a result of the globalization, which has stimulated the growth in the global economy over the past 2 to 3 decades or so. Possibly it is the strong interlinkages between countries which is leading to such a rapid outbreak with fewer possibilities for containment. And the more we live in this way, the more likely that there will be repetition of these events in the long run, and therefore the greater the imperative of being prepared to conduct our business within these new operating requirements.
Thank you, Gordon. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we've heard so much in the conversation this far about how important adaptability is, agility, and the ability for a company to pivot. Can you share any great examples of that? How important is that going to be going forward? Gordon, I'll come to you first on that, please.
Yes. This agility and adaptability is not only a requirement which economies are expecting from business, but it's also to be expected from the entire spectrum of social partners. So there were governments, and there are governments, who have very rapidly and in a matter of few days provided stimulus packages to at least ensure economies that governments will be there to sustain demands, incomes, employment, overall stability in the business setup. That's the Keynesian part. That's the part where governments tried to reinstill confidence in a situation which was very, very rapidly developing into one where psychology could be in itself a function and determining the catastrophe, the economic catastrophe that could have followed. So there was that one aspect. Now that that aspect has been more or less settled, we ask, what next? Governments are incurring debts. Health systems around the world are coping with varying levels of success with containing the outbreak and containing the medical effects. But the what next is, how do we now emerge from this situation where governments cannot continue to indefinitely stimulate economies and where health systems cannot continue to require populations to remain in lockdown and in freeze, to a situation where we move back to operating in a situation where health concerns and conditions can be well addressed or reasonably addressed and remediated. Of course, there will be sacrifices to make, there will be adaptations to make, but we're also learning some interesting examples. And here we have the idea that what we should have been doing quite long ago in terms of having this meeting through electronic means, possibly 6 months ago, we would have driven 3 cars, met in one place, and have been doing this together. Why? We had no reason back then why we had to do that and pollute the air and result in more congestion, whereas we're working more efficiently and productively in this manner. So there are not only challenges, there are also opportunities to be had from this episode, and which I hope one day, should we relapse in certain bad habits that we used to have a few months ago, we will once again remember COVID to keep us in the straight and narrow path in which we should be developing our economies in a more sustainable manner. Now we leave it up to also the private sector, the private operators, to use whatever government funding and other market opportunities that arise in order to make a good business performance out of this. There will be some very important winners. Those firms who will be first to adapt and offer what the consumers require in this new, more health safety conscious world. Those businesses who can help other businesses achieve these objectives in a rapid way. And here I'm thinking a lot about tourism, for example, but also logistics, transport, a number of other consumer-facing services. Those will definitely be the winners. There will also be losers. It is inevitable that there will be losers in this world, because essentially this shock means that the global economic cake will be shrinking. So there will have to be losers. There cannot be a win-win probably out of this situation.
Thank you. Thank you, Gordon. And JP, with that in mind and everything that's Gordon said, can you share any great examples that you've seen of companies that have pivoted, and maybe just give us some sort of quick fire advice for companies that are thinking, okay, I'd love to pivot, but are you talking to me? Can I do this?
Yes, I think as well, it's a question of agility and transformation here that we're looking at. So we're seeing companies that have quickly adopted technology to be able to be closer to the consumers. Case in point that really strikes home here locally, we've seen a number of farmers or communities coming together to actually go on digital and sell the products directly through various digital channels. And I think that is something which is very important, because why? Unfortunately, possibly even economists get very carried away by the numbers or the headline figures, and agriculture has never gets lost in the complete economic discussion. But I think through COVID, we've realized, for example, the importance of food security of a country, and the importance of having a sustainable farming community that can generate the required produce. And the fact that such a small economic sector has been able to transform themselves, even embracing digital, that's a very good thing. And I think we also have something to learn from the farming community. Why? Because agriculture is used to this volatility, right? Because it can have a complete produce, one storm, and ruins all the produce. So the mentality of farmers is very much attuned to dealing with volatility. We've seen companies that usually transport people pivot to transport goods. So grocery deliveries, takeouts of food. We've seen restaurants adapting from providing meals at restaurant to providing home kits for families to prepare foods. Manufacturing companies pivoting to start manufacturing sanitizers or disinfectants. So I think here what's really, really important, and even I would also add to the employee level, adaptability is going to be key. So even in this downtime, it's important that even employees, individuals start investing in skills, acquiring new skills for the new economy, because this is going to change fundamentally what services are going to require. And also, more importantly, I think for companies, they need to understand the new consumer trends that are going to come on stream. So that is going to require quite some transformation in themselves, reshaping the strategy, and also fundamentally their own business models. So retail can also possibly reshape on how is the future shop going to look like, given that we now have a broader cohort of people actually utilizing online channels. So the concept of the shop can transform itself more into a showroom or a showpiece, but then the actual order or the actual conversion of that sale will happen through online. So I think that there are going to be fundamental changes, which also depend on the length of the pandemic, right? Yeah. So that this is all a question of flux at the moment.
Of course.
Can I ask you a question in turn, Joe? Can you ever see a face mask becoming a fashion item?
Well, yes, why not? What a great way to think about it. Absolutely. We are of course wearing a face mask when we go out like everybody else. And yeah, I guess it's going to have to be part of our look for the foreseeable future. So of course, I'm sure that people are going to, I mean, I have seen examples of people making face masks themselves and even making them on brand for their own, to represent themselves. So sure, what a great question. So sort of turning the tables a little bit on what we've heard about, you were talking, JP, about employees also needing to sort of pivot and become agile. We are seeing projections from the Malta Chamber that there could be 20,000 redundancies as a result of COVID. That's actually a figure revised down from 50,000. So it's looking more positive, but of course, we're not going to be in the position that we were in before, where, for every job application, there were only a few applications. It's going to look different. What do you think about this assessment? How different is it going to look? JP?
Well, here again as well, I stay away from predicting numbers. I think we're going to see an increase in unemployment the longer it takes. So even the latest reports from the Commission, IMF, you're looking at a broadening and a widening, most probably in the region of 5 to 7% over there. But there again, there are so many variables. It also depends on the reserves of companies, the government aid, if it's going to include new sectors as well, which can start feeling the pinch in a couple of, because economies work as well with a lag. So some companies are currently possibly doing well because the services are shifting towards them, for example, digital and all of that. But eventually, the cash flows of companies can also die down. The war chest, the so-called war chest of a government, will also start reaching a limit. And is it going to go infinitely for borrowing? So there are so many dynamics at play over here that I think we should focus less on the numbers and more on the strategies that should take us and transform us into the future.
Okay, and Gordon, what do you think of the figure? With that in mind, what JP said, are we looking at 20K, 50K, lower?
I definitely concur with JP. Numbers are interesting, not so much to be interpreted as forecast of what will eventually happen, but to guide us in the directions that we should be taking in terms of better managing our economy. When there were estimates and forecasts of 50,000, that could have been 70 or 40 for all I care, but the message there was clear. Government needs to intervene to restore confidence, to save the integrity of businesses, which we will be needing in the process of adapting, restructuring, and eventually emerging competitively. That was the clear message. With the numbers now declining, with these worrying numbers now declining, it seems that we have gone round the first corner. Confidence to some extent has been reestablished, and we can now look perhaps more rationally at the challenges that are ahead of us. Some businesses are doing well. Many businesses have the potential to adapt and do well. Others may need to completely rethink what they are doing, or perhaps also disinvest. I mean, let's talk in practical terms. Malta, up to a year ago, was used to receiving almost 2.8 million tourists. Can we reasonably hope to continue attracting that kind of volume? Or is this the opportunity to refocus our tourism model towards the fewer numbers in terms of arrivals, which are also more consistent with a better health safeguard model, but now at the same time restoring our earnings through better spending per capita? This is an objective which we have been trying to go for at least for a couple of decades, at least since I started in my profession 25 years ago. But now it's an opportunity. It's almost a forced opportunity on us. We cannot but go into that kind of direction. So once again, our tourism sector has really a lot to think about refocusing into getting to that direction. And with tourism, there goes the overall well-being of the country. There goes the state of our environment, the state of our infrastructures. There goes also the complete business proposition and attractiveness to other international service or business lines that we may be attracting to our economy. So this number has to be now reinterpreted in terms of the directions where we would be going. Another point which comes to it, if we're talking about 20,000 jobs, people, are they within the hardcore which we definitely want to sustain in our country, or are they within the safety valve of jobs which our country always knew that would be sustainable perhaps for a number of years, but which would then in any case need to shed as the construction boom would have normalized, as other activities which are relying perhaps on more foreign short-term imported labor rather than the longer-term imported labor? Possibly now we might be considering this number to lie within that margin as well. So my point here is also to look at the quality and type of those jobs rather than just the absolute number.
Okay. Thank you. And that leads me to sort of a question about the support that we have had from the government so far. So we've heard a lot about sort of Annex A, Annex B, and of course, those that have been left out of both annexes. Do you think the fact that maybe people are getting much less support in Annex B and then even less support, of course, if they've been left out of that, do you think that was a sort of short-term move? Was it a regretful move for the government because long-term there will be more people who are unemployed now and that businesses couldn't support? Gordon, I'll come to you first on that one.
Yes, the question of the support that was offered by government was intended to safeguard for the short term the integrity of firms whose the solution wouldn't have been beneficial to the economy. And therefore, in my opinion, it was very right to, at that point in time, focus the limited resources, substantial but limited resources that we have on those industries, on those sectors which received the brunt of the shock at that point in time, which mainly consisted of the closure of the airports and the practical halt to all tourism activities. So that, in my opinion, was justified in terms of the initial substantial, massive injection of funds in the economy. Clearly not a sustainable medium-term solution, because if these firms were to remain employing people based on these handouts, then would simply be substituting unemployment with underemployment. You're still not productive. You're still not, selling. You're still not operating. There would be little justification to keep any industry, any firm operating in a situation where it doesn't seem probable that it is going to survive in the medium to longer term. And that is why our challenge now is to fight not unemployment, but to fight underemployment, to ensure that whoever is receiving these subsidies is effectively adapting to be able to live, survive, and compete in a new COVID-dominated world where we will have to be operating at least for a few years coming from now. As JP said, the government's war chest in this respect is not unlimited, of course. It's substantial, especially as compared to other countries, but not unlimited. And therefore, this business adaptation, this adaptability of workers, this concerted effort also through appropriate government incentives for the ways in which we're doing business to change as rapidly as we can is now the imperative.
Thank you. JP, your thoughts on that as well? Annex A, Annex B. Have we done enough? Do we need to do more from a government perspective to keep companies and people in their job?
I think when evaluating impact and the efficacy of measures, we need to look at a number of criteria. One, if they're timely, and I think over here, the focus here needs to be very much on the implementation of measures, because ultimately government can have the best measures, but remember the measures are being delegated to a new set of actors, which are mainly the banks and the financial institutions. So over here, we need to make sure that their implementation is as timely as possible, because firms need to get access to funds to make sure that the business remains liquid, even for the short term. And touching to what Gordon said, I think here we need to start looking at aid being conditional, in the sense that, listen, we need to start helping companies to transition. We're seeing what the EU is saying, we're seeing what UK is doing. There's a lot of conditionality attached. So we're ready to support, but if you start pivoting or transitioning yourselves and your employees to the new sectors that are going to be in demand, because ultimately here we have to talk about a productive economy. So it's, and in this line, there's a question of as well reassessing our expectations. And I think over here, we started getting very much attached to the 6% growth, 7% growth, which in reality, that is a short-term cycle. any economy can't continue growing at those rates indefinitely. So here we're looking at a wake-up call, so to speak, that, listen, sustainable growth can happen at the 3-4%, but let's focus very much on the quality of growth and not focus on the quantity. So even here, I think aid needs to help, for example, companies transition much more in the digital space, to support them transform themselves. Unemployment benefits or wage subsidies should be accompanied by training mechanisms as well, whereby people might spend 2 days per week, given that they don't have all that productive activity at the workplace, training in new activities. We, as a country, did this successfully in the 2008 crisis, which is completely different than this. But I think that area of targeted, timely, temporary aid, also tied to conditionality and transformation and transitioning, I think should come in useful now.
Thank you. And that leads me into a sort of question about sustainability. We've pressed pause at the moment, and we've seen, we've all seen the pictures of the clear skies. We all know about the reduction in air pollution. Gordon, you mentioned it earlier, and you and I have spoken about this before, bringing the well-being economy into sort of focus at this time. Is there a chance for that? Is this the sort of big opportunity we've been looking for when it comes to sustainability, doing things better? Gordon.
Yes, as you rightly said, we've been now looking at our economy coming of age in a certain sense, because there were various periods of growth spurts in our economy. Really, if you take a bit of a medium to longer term perspective, you'll see that every 10 to 15 years, our economy needed to reinvent itself. At least since the period of independence, construction in the 60s, manufacturing in the 70s, tourism 80s, then you had new services 80s and 90s, and with financial and gaming, and again a resurgence in construction in more recent years. The next step in our economy becoming of age was to focus more on well-being as a target in itself, because at the end of the day, we as economists are here to serve the society in which we are operating in, rather than to serve some kind of abstract notion of an economy which is not clearly hinged into the well-being of the individual within families, within communities and societies, of course. But it is also, especially for Malta, a long-term sustainable business proposition where the well-being model itself can attract international business. I would very much like to promote this vision for our country to be the regional place of choice where to live, work, heal, obtain recreation, relax, create culture, be innovative. And I think our country has this vocation to get there. And we were, pressing very much in this direction over the past few months to transform the dividends of growth into real well-being development opportunities. Then this unexpected shock came along, and as in many other kinds of unpredictable shocks in life, there will be the positives, the negatives, the clouds with silver linings, and sometimes the silver linings with the clouds. But what I mean to say here is that definitely we are learning to work differently, to consume differently. We are being forced, in a certain sense, to make choices which we should have been making in any case for our own benefit, but we weren't doing simply because we were myopic, we were short-term, we were selfish, we didn't care about neighbors or future generations. Now we're being forced into those directions. I say, let's make the best of this time, let's learn, let's adapt, because this is probably what the new marketplace will be asking of us. And I believe that we have a responsibility, leadership at the level of government, at the level of business, at the level of social partners, trickling down to management, trickling down to employees and consumers, to drive society in this proper direction, which is sustainable from the health safety perspective, which is now gathering a lot of importance, but also the usual arguments which we used to make about the environment, social inclusion, and the overall well-being of our citizens.
Thank you, Gordon. That gives me great hope there. Leading on from that, before we take some questions from our viewers, JP, can it be done? Can we solve global warming? Can we address climate change? And can we still have a growing economy as we go forward? Having had this shock to our systems, doing things like, meeting online, not commuting, not traveling as much for pleasure or even for business, can we sustain it? Or is it just a fantasy land that we're living in at the moment?
I think it's now completely up to us. I think we've woke up to a new reality. World is going by, and as we said earlier, this meeting is being held remotely, meetings abroad. So I think even the question of business travel will be fundamentally changed. So I think it's now entirely up to us, up to leaders at each and every level. We also mentioned, as SEED, we published a report on the future vision of the country. And I think a crisis in the pure Greek word of a crisis is actually a productive state. It's a turning point. So now it's really up to us. I think we've all seen the photos of dolphins in harbors and the canals in Venice much cleaner. So I think everyone is realizing that we've been forced to stop and what the benefits are. And I think even the risk of new pandemics coming on stream is a clear indication that even the level of urbanization, the level of environmental protection is actually key to economic growth and development. So it's now the need and the time for finding this new economic model, which shows that an economy can co-live with environmental elements as well. So they're not mutually exclusive, but actually complementary. So I think at this point in time, even countries, we now need to really sit down and say, what future do we envision for the country, right? And this is where we should all come together to actually envision this and start rallying and working towards it. I perfectly concur with what Gordon said. Malta has all the elements in place to actually find this balance over here. But it might need some fundamental changes in the way we approach economic models, the way we approach economic thinking, and also the way we position ourselves. And I think here we really need to start seeing the transformation of industries happening as well. That our economy is always much more dependable on services, but what type of services? So, and the importance that policy making is holistic in nature, that we don't think in silos, right? So even, for example, the tourism industry, bed capacity, the type of tourists that are coming, are they going to hotels or Airbnbs? So even here, policy making needs to start being very much evidence-based, projecting consumer trends in the future to make sure that all growth is actually sustainable.
Thank you both. Now we're going to take just a few questions from our viewers. Viewers watching us live at the moment can still submit a question if you're watching. The first one, great question. We've seen so much development over the last few years. It is now, it has largely come to a halt. So obviously development is still going on. But we have, offices and apartments. Are they going to be ghost developments? Is this it? Are they going to remain empty? or do you see that there is still space for all of the existing developments? And also sort of looking to sort of the planning side of things, should we, now that we've seen how quickly things can come to a halt, should we be looking at not having more of these developments come onto the market? Gordon, I'll come to you first.
Yes, we mentioned Keynes, we mentioned Darwin. There is also one of the oldest classical economists, I believe, who said that supply creates its own demand. So basically, we have been supplying developments in offices and flats, and we're a very tiny economy in the global market. If we supply the right product, quality, price at the right point in time, I'm sure that we'll find a sufficient market for us to occupy whatever we are providing. So let us not take a defeatist approach whereby we're expecting somehow this country to turn from a rapidly growing one to a ghost town. We can make that happen if we are defeatist and we continue to develop in a manner which is not sensitive to what the international global market requires of us. But if we transform those developments and adapt them in a way which is perhaps more consistent with the new requirements of the global market, which are more environmentally sensitive, health conscious, and which will be meeting what typically an international business proposition requires of a Mediterranean destination. I think that we have great potential on that front in order to make important inroads with business opportunities. It is also important to translate now these ideas of smart development in the ways and the methods in which planning permits will be granted from here on.
Thank you, JP. Anything to add on the development side of things and what we should be doing going forward?
No, I think this is it. It's a question of utilizing this to continue transforming ourselves. So if we're able to build green, build smarter, increase or up the quality, up the bar of facilities management, waste management as well in localities, and making sure that developments have a balance of landscaping, greenery. It's a question of continuously transforming and adapting to the new realities. So the economy, as Gordon said, is small. We have an attractive proposition. Now it's a question of making sure that that proposition is matched with the required quality.
And these are ideas which we should have been pursuing in any case for a long period of time. It is not the question that JP and I are saying these things now that COVID has hit us. Perhaps the COVID event will be making us as a society realize even more how much important these concepts are for our future.
Yeah. In fact, JP, as I heard you talk, we say if. Should it be must at this point? We must adopt these new ways of doing things. So, of course, that's something to think about. Another question coming in from Matthew this time. Matthew's asking, do you think that the measures are adequate enough to support startups and small innovative organizations? Or should something be done to cater for their needs better? Perhaps they're ones that haven't been catered for in the A and the B, or not at all. They haven't had any support. Should we be supporting the very small organizations that are at the sort of front line of innovation?
Yes, and in the sense, I think now is the time that startups will start mushrooming, because there's a lot of thinking time. It happened in the 2008 crisis. Some of the biggest unicorns were actually born in that time. And I think what is going to be central and for this is access to finance and access to capital. I mean, government set up the Malta Development Bank a couple of years ago, and it couldn't have come at a better time. And I think now we're going to see the true benefits of a development bank. However, even here, the development bank rests on financial institutions as well. It delegates a lot of the work to financial institutions. So over here, the loan guarantees become very important. Why? Because in a normal economy, startups always have a higher risk. Now, within the global context, the risk rating will actually increase. So it is crucial that banks, and here the Malta Development Bank will play a key role, actually has funds available for startups to actually find a home in Malta. And I think this has also been the government's vision, that Malta provides a place where startups can set up, thrive, and access Europe from here, primarily in the services space. And I think this is the right time to make sure that the startup culture happens, but has the right ecosystem supporting infrastructure for that to happen. Because we need access to finance, we need the talent, which we have. But we need to make sure that they don't fall in the risk rating trap and find a door closed to finance issues.
I see a greater role for the social partners in this space. Typically, packages and measures are the result of at least discussions, if not negotiations, between government and the social partners. However, if firms are not yet there, if they're yet to start up, they might fall in some kind of gap between two stools where they are not adequately represented or sufficiently represented at those high-level negotiating tables. So perhaps we should also ask our social partners to give even greater emphasis and more importance to this question of startups or for firms who will eventually contribute also to improve their membership base, both from an employer organization perspective as well as from an employer and an employee perspective in terms of the union, so that startup organizations can have a better representation when it comes to policies which are specifically addressed to them.
Fantastic, thank you. So as we wrap up, I would love to have your one piece of advice from each of you of what businesses can and should take from this period. Gordon, I'll come to you first.
Yes, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this hour. There are the dimensions of appreciating that there won't be a day in the near future where the sun will rise and things will be again as they used to be up to some months ago. That the trick perhaps is to start immediately as from now, thinking how I can sustainably operate within the COVID event going on perhaps for an indeterminate period of time, because even should that then disappear, I will still be in a stronger competitive position to operate. I would also suggest keeping very much close to the representative organizations which have direct links with government, especially when it comes to indications or directions regarding the potential reactivation measures which the government might be announcing, which would, of course, undo the freeze measures that were announced up to some time ago. And definitely, many times, it's a question of doing now, having the opportunity to do now what we've always liked to do for the past years, but we didn't have the opportunity, time, or a sufficiently receptive market to go there. Finally, I think we should appreciate that incomes, employment, and economic size will not be as large as we used to expect it to be up to a few months ago, at least for a few years to come. So we have to also adapt our expectations, psyche, to this new reality.
Thank you. Gordon, JP?
Yes, adding to what Gordon said, I think I would summarize everything in 3 P's. Transformation. So over here, companies need to actively take a proactive role in transforming their business models, their strategy. Second, technology. We're seeing the key role of the digital revolution, and even here, I think government needs to be a pioneer in the area to make sure that we transition to a digital society, right, whereby everything is digital, with digital signatures, digital health records, that everything is seamless. And finally, talent. I think both on an individual level, on a firm level, and on a country level, it's going to be key and critical that everyone has the skill base required for a new tomorrow, which is going to be different to what we have been used to.
Thank you, both of you, very, very much. Super insightful interview and great tips for us to be taking forward and thinking about there. Among the many things, Gordon, I would be thinking about my fashion-forward face mask, but of course, also taking much of both of your advice into our businesses and our lives. Thank you again for being with us. Thank you for everybody that joined us at home or wherever it is that you are in lockdown. We look forward to seeing you on the next edition of the Boardroom. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.